everyone. Thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartree here with another episode of Presenting Champions. Today with 8-0 undefeated Street Beefs champion at 145, Devin Pegg, known as Manu the Great. I think is a name very cool. The People's Champion. Up and coming fighter, as I mentioned, currently undefeated. Background in wrestling before transitioning to MMA. If you don't know what Street Beefs is, some of you all watching this will know what it is. Some of you won't. If you know what it is, then that's great. If you don't know what it is, then hold your horses, and we'll be getting into that shortly because it's a very, very exciting fighting format. But before we get into all that, champ, I just want to say big thank you for coming on, and big thank you for taking time out of your day to join me on the show. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you for having me, man. Appreciate it.
No worries at all. No worries at all. So, yeah, starting at the beginning, before we get to all the good stuff of obviously, winning a title, being undefeated, etc. and so forth, you have a background in wrestling that you were telling me about just now, which was sidelined by injury, etc. So, I'd like to start there because it sounds like that was the beginning of your combat sports journey. Let's go back in time and talk about that time in your life a little bit, please.
Yeah, well, I grew up playing football. So when I got to high school, I didn't want to wrestle, but a very close buddy of mine had talked me into it. And to me, wrestling was, hear me out, to me, freshman year, wrestling was grown men hugging in unitards. I didn't want to do that. I think it took me probably a week of practice before I fell in love with it because just like football, it's a contact sport. Um, and yeah, it just flew from there. I never really competed in any districts or anything because I wrestled my freshman and sophomore year, which were my first 2 years of high school, and then I blew my knee out. But the guys that I wrestled with and that got me into wrestling, he transitioned to MMA, and he won his first fight, first round TKO, and then it was like back in high school we're wrestling, we're training in MMA, and then just as you were talking about, COVID hit, and he didn't know what to do. He couldn't book a fight, so he had like an 8-month time off, and the whole time we're training. We have a setup at his house. Actually, we go to the gym too, but we do a lot of home training. And that's when he found StreetBeefs, and that's when he decided to go get a fight with StreetBeefs. He won that, and going into that, I hadn't even thought about competing yet. I was just like a supporter for a friend. I loved it. I got in trouble in the school a few times for fighting. So I thought I was a fighter. I thought I was a skilled fighter. So once he really fell in love with it, he started rolling. He won 2 Street Beef matches, and then was able to get more sanctioned amateur matches. And he was on a roll. I think he was like 7-0. And then he's like, "Look, you train with me and you do good. It's your first match." So Street Beefs is the pinnacle of a backyard fight club. So in their original home yard, they have the whole cage, the whole setup. They have like a wall of fame. My first fight was at a pop-up event closer to where I live. We had 2x4s with ropes strung up, with floaty noodles on the ropes. So it was a very odd scene. And just as we were talking about earlier, Street Beefs is the type of organization in which you sign up and you don't know who you're fighting until the day that you show up to the event. So it's a little nerve-wracking too, but overall it was an amazing experience. And I think that was really what set the fire under me, was winning my first fight, and then like feeling the atmosphere and the community, and really it's setting in that like this is like everything I've done in my life. It's physical sport. You got a crowd and everything. So it's just Street Beefs is where I made my realization. I fought twice that day and I won both of them. So after that, we kicked it into high gear. He focused on his amateur career, and I focused on Street Beefs. And my second event, I also did 2 fights and won them. My third event, I won It was a close fight with a very good opponent, but I won that fight, and then I was 5-0, and that's when I decided to drive 16 hours to Virginia to go fight for the belt. And there was actually a little bit of I don't know the exact word for it, but confusion with my first belt fight. Third round, late third round, I caught my opponent with an overhand right, and I had cut him, but I had also poked him in the eye apparently. So he wasn't able to continue via eye poke. They gave me the belt and then rescheduled a rematch, and that was like a big point in my career at this point, because it was like nobody thought I could beat him again. He was the 9-1 champ. He's like, their best fighter. And he's a fan favorite too. He calls himself Menace Mike, and he's a great guy, but he plays that role of the menace so well. It's a very mental game. So that was a point where I, as a 6-0 undefeated fighter, actually thought to myself that I couldn't beat him again. So I did what any person that's scared to lose does, and I just trained every day for a month. And in a month time, I came back, and I beat him pretty bad. We went all 3 rounds, but it was a unanimous decision, and shook hands after. And it's a lot of respect that goes into the sport too, and I love that. But after that, I've fought a couple of people who were contenders, but as of right now, I'm 8-0, looking to fight 13-1 Sensation. He wants to come for my 145 belt, and then I think Beach is 10-2. But I'm supposed to be fighting him for his belt, so I'm looking to go after 145 and 155. But yeah, we're rolling now. My goal is to not take any more MMA matches for StreetBeefs until I fight my belt fights. So what I've been doing lately is jiu-jitsu matches. StreetBeef does combat jiu-jitsu and regular jiu-jitsu. So I'm 1-1 in jiu-jitsu too. And I think that's where I find the most fun in it, is grappling, because my wrestling background. But yeah, that's the story. And I have a lot of motivators too, because when I tore my ACL in high school, I wasn't able to get it fixed right away, and that's why I stopped playing sports. At that time, my parents got a divorce. My mom got really bad off on drugs, and my dad just kind of the other way. So for those 4 or 5 years that I didn't have a sport, like a physical outing, it just was a dark time in my life. And my mom ended up passing away from overdosing 2 years ago. So that's like another thing that once I got back into it, it really fueled me. So it's almost, how do I want to put it? It's almost like a revenge story. Like, I never got the chance to finish out my high school sports, but now I have the opportunity to do what I love as an adult. You know what I mean? So that definitely pushes me.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's an amazing story on quite a few levels, to be honest with you. I mean, including the inspirational level of some of what you've overcome and turning the negative into a positive. Very sorry for your loss, man, because that is hard. I mean, I don't think words can do that justice, to be honest with you. So, but I am very sorry for your loss there. But how you've turned a negative into a positive, massive respect for that. You know how you came into it, bouncing back from the injury. Massive respect for that. So, you've given us pretty much the story in a nutshell there. A couple of things that I want to hone in on a little bit. You touched on something earlier. You touched on your home training and then your gym training and the difference there. But you also touched on the mental side of competing, which I think is overlooked a lot in combat sports. And you admitted that it was a bit nerve-wracking, which, very, very few fighters will actually admit to that. I mean, you ask a lot of guys and they'll give you that, oh no, man, I don't feel none of that, I'm cool. But, the fact you actually said that. So how do you mentally approach a competition? I mean, you're going into these matches, you don't know who you're going to fight. As you mentioned, the one of them, you traveled 16 hours. I was going to ask you about that, but you've mentioned it. So mentally approaching these things, what is going through your mind on the immediate build up to a fight,
Um,
if you get on with this?
yeah, so it's hard because like you said, not a lot of people admit it, but um, title fights, I'll know who I'm fighting beforehand because it's for a belt. Every other one, like we said, we show up, and I would say honestly, I would say it's more nerve wracking to not know who you're gonna fight than to know who you're gonna fight. Because an obvious case of watching tape and everything like that, I'm a fighter that believes 50% of what you do is outside of the cage. The other 50% is inside of the cage. You gotta do your tape, train, drill. Drillers are killers. But I don't know. The way that I think about it is I'm better than anybody else, but that's only because I work as hard as I work. And I'm shaking every time before I go into that cage, man. I'm shaking. And like I've accepted the fact that I'm probably gonna get knocked out one day. I will lose a fight one day. But it's like that fear in the back of my head is what pushes me to train so hard. Like I get up every morning and I run a mile or two, try to get 50 to 100 push-ups in, and I haven't been doing that very long, probably about 2 weeks, but I've realized that my competition is a step up from what it was before, and that I need to step it up. So it's almost like I have a safety net of believing in my hard work, and that helps with the courage. But I would say unless someone is a mentally unhinged fighter, everybody's scared for they get in that cage. Every single person, even if you've done it 1,000 times, because I would say the more experienced you are, the more scared you get, because the more you know what can happen. When I didn't understand fighting, especially boxing as a whole, and I thought that I could box and I sparred with a true boxer, it opened my eyes to a whole different world. So I don't know, man. The way that I look at it is like belief comes from what's the word? Belief comes from like proof, and proof you get through hard work. You work hard, you'll see your progress. So therefore, you won't be as bothered by it. But I'd say I could work every day until my next fight, and I'd still walk up to the cage fighting jitters and shaking and all that. Honestly, though, it's like a tunnel thing. When you get in that cage, and once they say your name and everything, I have a routine where I do my Muay Thai bow that my Muay Thai teacher taught me, and that's like releases everything, and it just puts me in the zone. So I do have like a ritual that I do try to shake nerves.
Yeah. I like that. I like that because it's also a valuable lesson as well for a lot of other fighters out there, whether they're professional, amateur, whatever, and people wanting to get into the sport. It shows them a little bit about the realism of what it's like. So I try and do that with these interviews. I try and give a little bit of value to people who are watching around the world because you can it might sound strange, but you can apply that lesson to life as well as to combat sports. There's a lot of people you're going in to do something, whether it's a job interview or a test or whatever it is, and you feel really nervous. And obviously, what you've put across there shows ways of handling that, and I think are really, really valuable. So I'm glad we got into that. Another thing to get into about Street Beefs itself that I think is really cool is obviously the nature of the events themselves. What I mean by that is the crowd, the fact they're outdoor, the fact they're basically on the ground, on the earth,
Yeah.
and all the rest of it. And it's very raw. Now, some people watching this, they'll know all about that because they will have seen the videos. Some people, it's their first exposure ever. Some people, they're somewhere in the middle. So trying to sort of cater this for everybody. What are your thoughts on how that, first of all, changes the dynamics of a fight, but also the energy that it creates? Because as I mentioned, I mean, the crowd, they seem quite close in the ones that I've seen. When I had Matthew Crawford on here, shout out to him, big smile. He was talking to me about this, that he's fought in all weathers as well. One of the things he said is he's fought in like summertime heat, he's fought in winter when the ground's wet and it's this, that, and the other. So your thoughts on that side of it, on like the raw nature of the setup of the events, would be really cool to delve into a little bit as well.
I think I mean I love it because you got to think of it as three levels. Either the promoter, the fighter, or the viewer. Um,
Mhm.
And as a promoter, they do it right. They always have people there, paramedics. They have multiple people in the ring for every fight, so everyone can see an angle, so nothing goes too far. They stop at any signs of blood. If they can't stop the bleeding, then they call the fight, which is just for the safeties of the fighters. So I think it's hardest, honestly, on the promoters, StreetBeefs itself, for it being outside. But as the viewer, that's the closest thing that you're going to get to a street fight without watching somebody seriously injure somebody else in a vulgar manner. People can still get injured in an MMA fight, whether it's StreetBeefs or UFC, but it brings a little bit of humility to what is a very aggressive physical sport. And as a fighter, I've come to realize that StreetBeefs isn't just a normal MMA organization. I don't know how much Smile went into this, but they started as a guns down, gloves up organization because in the hometown of the president of StreetBeefs, there was a lot of gun violence. And I love the movement because as a person who grew up in a city with a lot of gun and drug violence and all that, I think children to men, all in between, who've never been in a gym or been in like an organized sparring match, think it would just gain a little bit of humbleness and humility from it. So it started as that. So the fact that we're looking at now an organization that has ranks of experience level of fighters, they have mixed martial arts, boxing, they do jujitsu, they do kickboxing, they do cage boxing, which is boxing with clinch and elbows allowed as long as they have elbow pads. So they've grown from this almost like organization just trying to stop violence on the streets to the biggest platform that I've seen for amateur fighters on a national scale. We just had a fighter from Australia fly over and fight at the last event, and he's been a part of the group on Facebook for like years now, but he finally got the opportunity to come fly over, and he did amazing. But it's like when that hits you, there was a member from Australia who flew over to come fight at StreetBeefs. It's just crazy to think about. Back to the whole weather and nature thing. So it does affect a fight. It gives it that grittiness, I would say. One of my fights, I don't wear shoes when I fight. The other fighter did, and I got caught with a head kick. A lot of people were complaining about that. In all seriousness, as the person who got kicked in the head, you can't tell the difference between a shoe or a foot. You just feel that you got hit. So that's like a big thing that people complain about. But other than the obvious, you're going to slip in the mud sometimes. It's not the adrenaline pushes out anything that would be too much of a problem. But I have a boxing match, actually, that it started to rain while we were boxing, and we just kept boxing. So I've weathered the weather for a fight, and it just, like you said, the energy from the crowd and the weather, like you're getting up, and whether it's you or your opponent, you got dirt on you, grass in your hair. It is exciting, and it adds a level of energy. And the crowd can be positive or negative depending if you're winning or losing. But I believe that energy is very useful in a fight because you feed off of that. So whether winning or losing, the crowd does hold some sort of power in that. But I've never crowd that is like, how do I bias towards any fighters, even like the most famous fighters and the one that's been there the longest. You still hear people cheering against them just as almost like just like a good community thing. StreetBeefs, and it blew me away because they're an organization based off of violence, fighting. I've never met like a better, well put together group of respectful men and women in my life. And I've realized that with all the mixed martial arts communities, between the discipline and respect that you learn in the gym, dojo, it translates into your life. So I would prefer any young or starting out fighter to just go look into Street Beefs to see what it is. And if you do happen to be in America or get a chance to come over here, it is the perfect way to have in-cage experience without messing with your amateur record. That's my output on it. The platform, the experience, and the community, you can't get it anywhere else. So if I was a coach, which my coaches don't necessarily like Street Beefs, they want me to go sanctioned, understandable. But if I was a coach, I would tell my young fighters, go experience what it's like to be in a cage with another grown man. And if you like it, then we'll keep moving on. But I just think the community, I just think it's something that you don't get normally. Gyms, promotions. It's not that people are selfish, but it's about the financial gain a lot of the time, especially in amateur fighting. People will put fighters in very bad predicaments to make $1 off them. Street Beefs is never like that. And granted, you do get matched up same day. I've seen them ask somebody about a matchup, and the person was like, no, I'm not comfortable fighting him. And they're like, that's fine. It's okay. We'll match you guys up differently. So it's just, I don't know, the experience, the community, like you said, the raw, gritty, uncutness of the outside. It's just, there's nothing like it, man. It's so unique.
Yeah. 100%, man. I mean, there's a lot of points you went into there, which are brilliant, and we could sort of go off on each one. But yeah, I mean, the ethos behind it, the meaning behind what they've created, absolutely fantastic. I've got all the respect in the world for that. Everything you said about the raw nature of it, again, very unique. There's not a lot of organizations like that around. Where they're doing it outside or they're doing that sort of environment. We have one over here in the UK called Spartan Promotion, which is actually a bare knuckle company. They do their shows outside, but there's not a lot even around the world, and I speak to people all over the world. So Street Beefs, it's a very, very unique format, and I totally get where you're coming from about up and coming fighters, or people who just want to start for the first time getting in there, because as you say, it doesn't interfere with amateur records, doesn't interfere with experience. It's a great way to build experience. So on all counts, fantastic organization, and I wish them the very best, that they keep growing, keep doing what they're doing. They've got an amazing talent base, and it is absolutely fantastic. So moving forward a little bit into like your future plans. Now, you mentioned earlier at the beginning about targeting these other belts and different things that you mentioned. In terms of that, you mentioned that your coaches want you to sort of move away from Street Beefs. Obviously, you love it, so I'm sort of curious where that will go. But in terms of your future plans, a little bit further again, so you mentioned these two belts or whatever it is, but moving beyond that, where do you sort of see your career going in the next, say, I don't know, 2 years or some arbitrary amount of time that you have in your mind to get to the level that you're aiming for, basically?
So my ultimate goal is to become a professional fighter. But one thing that I've learned is you can't rush success. You cannot rush success. But success when you're not looking at most points. My first fight in Street Beefs was August of last year, so I haven't even been doing it for a full year. So my goal is to transition to amateur. Like by the end of this year, I'll start having AMI fights. And I'm not going to completely pull out of my Street Beefs career just because the exposure in the community, if they're ever close or I have a little bit of free time, I'll definitely go travel. But once I win my last 2 fights and I'm 10-0 as a Street Beefs fighter, I'm going to move on to AMI. I don't want to be an AMI fighter for more than a year and a half or 2 years max. I want to get 5 to 10 fights. 5 is a minimum before you go pro, but 5 to 10 fights. And it's all about when I feel like I'm going to be ready to move to pro. But I imagine as long as I put a good year consistent in the gym, whether it's Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, BJJ, just a year of consistency. And I feel like I'll be ready for the lower levels of pro. I mean, I already feel like I'm good to compete at any championship level amateur. So I know by the time that I am competing at championship levels and amateurs, I'll feel ready enough to be competing as a pro. But that's like I said, it's all in a process. My goal though is 2025, the latest, I want to be a pro fighter. And I'm looking to and all right, so let me say it like this. So I'm a big numbers person. I like to delegate all problems in my mind so that I don't hit a road bump. And I do that with my career too. So every UFC champion right now is over 30 years old. Whether they came in the game at 27 or they came in at 21, every champion is over 30. So as long as I have 3 years at least before I turn 30 to build a resume in a pro organization like Bellator or UFC or something like that, and then I can become a champion around the age of 30, going on into later stages of my career, that's what perfect looks like to me. You know what I mean? That's what I planned out. But we all know how life goes. You get thrown curveballs, so that's a rough draft.
Yeah, rough draft for sure. I mean, it's good to be having those goals out there. I'm a big believer in that, visualizing, planning, all of that good stuff. And yeah, I mean, these things never, usually don't work out exactly as we want. But then at the same time, if you have the end in mind, you can still get there, even if the journey getting there isn't exactly a straight line and it's a little bit more wavy like that. That's usually my experience. But it is fantastic, and I really feel that as a fighter, you can go a long way. And I'm not just saying that to be polite or for the purposes of us being on here. I really get that vibe. I mean, I've sat down with enough guys over the years to sort of get a feel for what's what. And a lot of people, they have one or two ingredients. They have the physical skills, but when they're put under pressure, they fold. Or they have more heart, but they don't have the defense. Or they have one or two ingredients, but not all of it. And
Yeah.
with yourself, obviously you're learning, you're growing, you're improving. So by no means I'm saying that you're a perfect person, neither am I. But at the same time, I can see the raw ingredients there. That if you keep building on them the right way, you can go to the top. And I don't say that lightly, and I wouldn't say that to everybody, to be honest with you. But sitting looking you in the eye, I really get that vibe. So that's not even a question. That's just me saying something that maybe you need to hear. But in terms of this, I mean, we've gone into some good stuff. I mean, we've got into street beef, we've got into your motivations, mentality, physicality. So that moving into the last couple of things, I think that'll be pretty much the last two questions, probably. Because then it'll be a nice intro for you. One thing looking back, one more looking back question that people always want to know. Every interview I do, pretty much, this comes into it about toughest fights. So it's not going to be any surprise. And I think this is really the most fan friendly question out there, or at least one of them. Even though other fighters may enjoy hearing this, it's one of the most popular questions I get with the fans. Toughest fights. Now, obviously, toughest fights can be for different reasons. It's not always who hits the hardest. Sometimes it can be the wrestling aspect. Sometimes it can be something else that was going on outside the cage or outside the ring, that wasn't ideal, whatever it is. So I don't mind which angle we go down, but in your own words, so far, which fight was your toughest fight and why, please, champ?
I would say it would be my last fight before I fell. Um, it was a rematch, um, and it was hard for the fact of, like you said, the fighter I fought, he was one of those guys that he had the heart. He had it. He had everything, but I don't think he had the experience or the knowledge. Um, Doesn't matter how many times I took him down, punched him, tried to submit him. He just was headstrong and kept coming forward. He wasn't one of those guys who would take a second to breathe. He was just kept coming at me. So I couldn't finish him. That was the only fight where I found myself on my back, actually having to defend myself. And there were a few times in the last round where it was like 10 seconds of me realizing that I was just kind of backpedaling and stalling because I was gassed. That was a fight where I really decided cardio is my best friend, because I was gassed and he just kept coming forward. I would throw a body kick and he'd eat it to the body and just keep coming forward, man. So and mentally that was something too, because I was watching me throw, you know, my all at somebody, and them just shake it off. You know, I have a lot of respect for him as a fighter too. And since then, we're friends on Facebook. Since then, he's been in the gym consistently. So honestly, I think it would be a cool thing to run it back with him, just to see how we've both grown as fighters. Because this was coming up on about 7 to 8 months ago. But yeah, man, headstrong, and he was talking too. He was like a Nate Diaz. He was talking crap while we were fighting. And even if I hit him, he would say something else. I'd take him down. He'd tell me, take me down again. He was just headstrong, just very forward. That I would say the hardest fight. Because the mental side that I was talking about before, as soon as that first punch was thrown, it was like everything was gone. You know what I mean? Like all the worry. So even my championship fights were smooth. That fight was the only fight that I went back to my corner and I said, please tell me I'm up 3 rounds.
Amazing, yeah. But it is, you know, testing yourself is how you grow at the end of the day. So, you know, even that's the beauty of it. You know, even if there's mistakes in there, or there's things that are less than perfect, they are all part of the bigger picture in the long run. So, sounds like you took some good lessons away from that as well. Moving into the last thing, really, because you know I know we've talked about some good stuff, and there's probably more aspects that we can talk about, but at the same time, you know, it gives people a nice feel for who you are, where you know where you've come from, where you're going, and obviously there'll be more interviews down the road as you get bigger and bigger. But hopefully, you know, this gives people a little insight into who you are. But in terms of like the fans and in terms of the support with Street Beefs, and not only the fans but you know the other fighters, and the community aspect, the respect aspect, it comes over even on social media or whatever. But when it comes to people supporting you, watching the videos on YouTube, because obviously they get crazy views on there as well, sending you messages, any form of support that you get from the fans, I like to give them a shout out to sort of close out interviews, because combat sports would be nothing without people supporting the fighters and everything like that. So, and with my interviews, I aim to cater to fighters and fans. You know, some people they never compete, or they're ex-competitors. Some people they're very active and they're growing. So, in terms of your words for your supporters, basically, that's the question. What would those words be, and what would you say to your supporters around the world who may be listening to this?
I mean, I would too. Listen, I'm a words guy. I talk, but that's something that I don't think words can really describe. Is my appreciation for the people who support me. Because like I said, my first fight wasn't even a year ago. So to say a year ago this was all a literal dream, I wouldn't be lying. And then I now have people today who you know, who text me all the time looking for tips, who've been doing it for years, but they see my success, so they come to me for tips. And seeing stuff like that, the motivation and inspiration that it pushes me to become better. And it's not just in the cage; it's as a man in myself. It's being disciplined in everything that doesn't have to do with fighting. Like I have a 7-month daughter at home. I have my fiance, so it really makes me look at myself from their perspective and become a perfectionist on who I am. So like, I don't know, it's just the words of appreciation, I couldn't put them, but it's, I don't know, it's blown my mind really, the influence that come from all this, and how other people have said that what I've done has affected them. It's really vice versa, like a mirror, because everything they do affects us, whether it's a like or a comment or a share. Um, we see that, and without that, as you said, we are nothing. We're just spending time doing things we love. Without the support, it's not successful. It's not fulfilling to a point,
Mm.
unless you know you have the fans and the supporters. And one thing that I would say too is to anybody out there that struggling mental health wise or anything like that, exercise is key. If people tell you you should run a mile and you can't run a mile, run a quarter mile, run a tenth of a mile. The next day, try to do a little bit more. When I started my cardio, it was bad. I'm running like 2 miles a day now in less than a month. So it's baby steps. And with exercise, I feel like comes a stability in the whole mental side of things. Finding like self-love and stuff. It's a big thing. And that's another thing. I don't mean to get sidetracked. That's another thing. One of my goals is I want to start a gym and like a nonprofit and really show people how physical health can affect mental health because it's so huge.
Yeah, that's some powerful advice actually, and it's something that affects a lot of people. And yeah, absolutely, it's another way that sports can help. I mean, I always say, just to close out with this, that sports and not only combat sports, but any form of exercise, it can be one of the most redemptive, healing things that you can do. And what I mean by that is I've seen it save people from, alcoholism, addiction, depression, anxiety, various other mental health disorders. People who've been locked up and they've been in serious trouble and they don't know how to discipline themselves. So many types of things. I mean, more than that it saved people from. I absolutely think that sports is one of the best things. But with combat sports, it does teach that extra level of respect, humility, and discipline, and some of the things you mentioned earlier. So it's a really, really good lesson to close out with. I'm very, very happy with that. But all I'll say, is once again, thank you for your time. I say the future is very, very bright. I've got no doubt that you'll reach the heights that you're aiming for. But I just do want to say a big thank you for coming on, taking this time out of your day, and a big thank you for sharing everything you shared. It's been absolutely fantastic. I'm very happy.
Yes, sir. And I'll give you one last treat. I stay down here in Florida. Get a beautiful view of the water.
Oh wow, that is very, very nice. Yeah, that's the life. That's living a dream. That is, man. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.